Jeff Coffin, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm hunkered down here in Nashville and feeling good though. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a live stream you were doing on Instagram earlier today.
Mm.
Um, and how often do you do those?
I do those once a week. I do it every Friday at 7. And tonight, a lot of times I do them on Facebook Live, but tonight I did it on Instagram. My friend John Estes was releasing a record on my label. And so I figured get him on there and talk about the recording and ask him a bunch of questions. He's a really great producer and engineer. And so he stays really busy with that. And but he's a great bass player also and guitar player. It's a beautiful, beautiful record. And but what I've been doing is, excuse me, doing these live streams to raise money for local Nashville musicians who are out of work. And so it's ITA Studio Streams. My studio is called Into the Air. So it's itastudiostreams.com. And people can donate there. And when we're allowed to start having people back in, then we'll do live streams with live musicians here. And I'll be able to pay them. And so we'll end up, hopefully over $10,000 in the account, and to be able to start dispersing to local cats, instrumental music primarily.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
So how long have you had the label?
I've had the label, I want to say since 2012. I was on a small label here in Nashville called Compass Records. And when my time with them was up, and they're amazing, wonderful people, but I just felt like we were going in divergent sort of musical paths,
Yeah.
And so I just thought, well, I can do this. And part of it was a financial thing also, like, because I was having to buy my CDs from them for $6 a pop. And, if I gave away 2 CDs at a gig, I'd have to sell 3 more just to break even, and I'd be out 5 CDs.
Right.
And I was just like, man, this just doesn't make any sense, So I took it upon myself to start my own label, and I've released a number of other projects on there also from local guys, and I don't take anything from them at all. It's kind of a strength in numbers place where it's we push it out. I've got a couple of assistants that help me with some stuff, and we push it out as best we can, and let people know about it. Got a nice website with it also, and we'll put up like a press page and an artist and a release page for all the releases. And so this is John's debut project, but he was on a duo project with the saxophone player on it, a guy named Doug Mosier, and a couple of years ago. And both are beautiful, beautiful records. And the next release is going to be this guy named John McKenna, who you probably haven't heard of. He's a brilliant saxophonist. I met him when he was in 7th grade. We were at music camp together. He's a couple of years younger than me. And it's blazing. And he's like he does these kind of industrial sculptures, and but he also is an illustrator, like a book illustrator, and he plays the crap out of the saxophone, and it's unbelievable. And he studied when he was in 7th grade, like all through high school. He was studying with Jerry Bergonzi and Garzone and those guys, and went to William Patterson and studied with Lovano. Actually toured with Joe for a little bit with that larger group that he had. And then, had a family and just kind of went underground. But, man, it's ferocious. It's like, it's unbelievable how great he sounds. Beautiful tunes and interesting. He's just, he's just got such a creative, fertile mind. And so his record will be next. And then I've got a couple of duo records that I've done. One with this cello player out of New Orleans named Helen Gillet. And then a duo with, Derek Brown. Have you met Derek?
I don't think so.
Saxophone
No.
player. They kind of know he's kind of known as the beatbox saxophone guy. Like he does.
Oh yeah,
all
yeah,
this,
yeah. I know who you're talking about.
Crazy stuff,
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
And so
He
we
went
did
to
a duo
CCM.
record here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did a duo record here that I wanted to write with him to kind of put us both into places that we weren't familiar or comfortable with,
Mhm.
and so we just finished the mixes on that also. But I'm going to turn the light on here in the studio so you can see. But I've been doing all my projects up here, and it's basically a loft space,
Yeah.
And I've got keyboards, I've got drums, and all the recording gear on this side of things. And so it's been really great, to have a spot, as you well know, to have a spot to create and to come to every day, especially in light of all the stuff with the pandemic and whatnot, all the lockdown. And so I've done my last 7 projects up here, I think. And so I've got it dialed in pretty well, and feeling good about it.
So, Jeff, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert?
I would probably say I'm an extrovert. Yeah.
So I'm introverted, and
Mm-hmm.
my wife is an extrovert, and the longer this thing goes, I think it's affecting her. It's having a bigger effect on her than it's having on me, right?
Yeah.
So I can just kind of sit down in the basement by myself, and I think there's all musicians have to have that disposition,
Mm-hmm.
the desire to, and the willingness to spend time with themselves, working
Right.
stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
But the longer she kind of is dealing with this, I think the more it's sort of affecting her.
Sure.
It's affecting me also, because
Right.
it's not like introverts don't like people.
Right. Of course.
It's just I can sort of recharge by myself, whereas it seems that extroverts sort of feed off the energy of other folks to recharge.
Right. Right.
So with that in mind, how has this time been for you?
Well, it's interesting, man, because it's actually been really good for me.
Okay.
I haven't had this sort of clear space since before 1997, and because I've been on the road since then full time, and teaching and doing workshops and just being really busy, So for me, it's been really good, and I mean, I miss my friends, and I miss playing, obviously, live. But I've just been hunkered down in the studio. I'm in the middle of like 20-something tunes, and I've been recording not only for myself but doing other projects for other people, and been doing online kind of master classes and different things also. So it's not like I've been twiddling my thumbs going, gee, what do I do today? And so it's been a really creative, fertile time for me, actually. And I've really enjoyed it. I told someone the other day, I said, man, I feel like maybe this is what it's like to be retired. And I was like, it's not so bad. I've been like really busy, and we planted the garden also, and I've been hanging out with my wife, which this is the most time we've ever spent together in a row. We've been together for 14 years. I was talking to Vic the other day, and he's like, man, he says from my kids, he says, I have never been home more than 2 weeks at a time in their whole lives.
Yeah.
And so there's some really positive things that are coming out of it. And even though I'm an extrovert, as you said, I still enjoy my time in here. Like I can stay in here all day, man, and feel perfectly okay. I can just be hanging and working on stuff and be like, oh wow, that much time has gone by. And but I've been trying to get out every day and like take a really great walk, like 45 minutes first thing in the morning, and then I sit on my porch swing, and I'll usually be talking to somebody on the phone, for for a little while, and really like finally having time to catch up with people in a way that I haven't before. And I think that that's going to change things for me. I do, and I think it's going to change things for a lot of people. Um, but even when I was at school, I was practicing 10, 12 hours a day, and I was fine being by myself. But I do like being around people also.
Right.
It brings me great joy.
So, I was in my mind, I was trying to put together when we met, and I know we were connected by Victor Wooten,
Mm-hmm.
and this would have been, I think I might have met you at a Bela Fleck and the Flecktones concert, and it seems like it would have been, let's see, 2000,
Could be.
2001.
Yeah.
It's sometime in there somewhere.
Yeah.
It all kind of starts to blend together.
Of course.
But and I just remember, and we played together. I was down in Nashville,
Yeah.
attending one of the summer sessions of the NAMM show, and then recording on one of Vic's records, and we ended up playing a gig.
Mm-hmm.
It was like I think it was at the spot that the Wooten brothers play at. I can't
Yeah.
think of the name of the venue now, but it seems like that was the first time that we played together, and I just remember thinking, this dude can really play.
I remember thinking the same thing.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it too, man.
Yeah, but it was a great experience, and it was a cool experience too, because I think Victor sort of fosters this kind of community kind of vibe,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the people that he has come and play with him, everybody is just trying to have a good time and
Right.
trying to get the most music out of it, and it never turns into like anything weird. It's always like a great experience, and
Yeah.
I definitely had that experience. So we stayed in touch, and it seems like maybe I saw you at one of your Mutet gigs, playing somewhere. I can't remember when that was. It was after that, and then you were traveling with Vic, with the Wooten Brothers gig, touring, and I caught you at some point in that setting, and we talked more and kind of solidifying a friendship and everything, and then after I started working at Ohio State, so this would have been maybe 2000. When did the Dave Matthews Band come to Columbus? Maybe it was 2010 or 12.
That might
or
be
something.
right. That might be right.
And you called me and you said, "Hey man, I'm going to be in town with the Dave Matthews Band, and hey, let's connect." And I was like, "Oh, this is great." So we got together, and it just so happened that it was the same time that we had our jazz camp at Ohio State.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and I was directing the camp, and we had some time, and we talked a long time, and you were like, "Hey man, why don't you take this VIP ticket to this concert?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do that." It was terrific. It was a great experience. I had a good time, and you most graciously donated your time presenting a topic to the jazz camp, and I mean, I know I've said thank you for that, but let me say again, thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome, man. I appreciate it.
It was very
My pleasure.
It was very inspiring to the students. You talked a little bit about how you got the Dave Matthews Band
Hmm.
gig, and that was really inspiring. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. Um, well, I have to take a step back and go back to when I was playing with the Flecktones. I started with
Sure.
Bailey in '97,
Yeah.
and we started doing some opening dates for Dave Matthews. And that was kind of during the heyday of the band. I mean, they were playing stadiums, like 40, 60,000 people at a pop. And um, so, we were doing some different sheds with them also. And so we got to know them, and they would invite us up to play, and they were always very gracious. And Leroy and I used to, we would talk shop and mouthpieces and necks and reeds and ligatures and neck straps, the whole deal. And how quickly we can clear out a room as saxophone players talking about gear. And so, kind of fast forward into 2008, and Leroy had a bad ATV wreck, one of the four-wheelers, and he hit a ditch on his property and got thrown off of it. And he broke, I think, like 8 ribs, his clavicle, scapula, punctured a lung. He was also diabetic, which complicates things a lot when you have those kinds of internal injuries. And so I got a call July 1st or July 2nd, I can't remember which. I was at a friend's wedding up in New York, and I was driving to Massachusetts when Dave Bendett, the Flecktones manager, called me, told me what had happened. And he said, they want to know if you can come sub for Leroy for 2 or 3 months. And I said, well, tell them yes, first of all. And I said, and get more details. I said, but tell them yes. I said, I have to cancel a bunch of stuff. And I said, when do they need me? He said, right away. I said, well, what's right away? And he said, the next gig's tomorrow in Charlotte. Right? Now, all my gear was in Nashville. I was in New York, driving from New York to Massachusetts, where I was supposed to spend a few days with my grandmother, my then girlfriend, my now wife, and my mom. And so I said, okay. I said, well, tell them yes. We'll figure it out, So I had my stepson, Caleb, drive all my gear. So I called him. I said, told him what was up. I had him drive all my gear from Nashville. I told him where everything was, and he drove it, to Charlotte. And I flew down early the next morning from Boston, and Rashawn came in early. We started scratching stuff out on a piece of paper, and told him what I needed. And that night, in front of 20,000 people. And most of the fans didn't know what had happened to Leroy. Yeah. It was just starting to come out what had happened, and why I was going to be there, and that whole thing. Then he tragically passed a month and a half into his recovery, and at the end of the year, they asked me to stay on, and I talked to Bela and the guys, and to Bela's credit, he said, look, man, he said, we're not working a ton right now anyway. And he said, he says, for you to turn this down, he said, would be crazy, and so, I have the utmost of respect for a leader that says, man, you should take this other gig, and so I've had 2 incredible gigs under 2 incredible leaders in my career. And I'm very, very grateful for that on every level.
So you went into some detail about some of the skills that you had as a musician that enabled you to be able to say yes to such a gig, to such an opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, as you well know, I'm a big proponent of fundamentals, as I know you are also. And I remember one of the things you were talking about at that clinic when I was here, you were talking about breath and support and how to breathe. And that's one of the fundamentals of making music. Listening is at the very top. And because I've spent so much time developing my craft of being a good listener, that was one of the big things that allowed me to do that. Also, having a good understanding of tone and dynamics, which I roll into one thing. Your tone is your identity, and your ability to express yourself, having a voice, is part of that. Understanding articulation, especially being in a horn section like I am with Dave Matthews, my role in that ensemble is very different than my role in, say, the mutet or in the studio, or what it was with the Flecktones. And so understanding how to articulate with another musician is a very important thing. Articulation is all about clarity, and not just clarity of a note, but a clarity of an idea, of a concept, of your tone, of whatever style of music you're playing. And so understanding that and being able to be authentic in your articulation, if you're playing funk or if you're playing jazz or if you're playing rock or whatever, those are really important things. Rhythm and time is another one. Understanding that time is what we consider to be basically metronomic, if you're going to like get down to the nitty gritty of it. And then we have group time also, which is more breathable. And rhythms are the pulsations over the top of that. And so having a strong understanding of that subdivision in particular is hugely important. And that's one of the things when I work with my students, I have them work on a tune at a tempo that they can realize double time. So they're immediately subdividing. And so they're working at two different tempos. Even if they're down at like 80 beats a minute playing a tune, I'm like, well, you have to be able to subdivide that and play your lines at 160 beats a minute.
Right.
And the last of what I call the big five fundamentals is harmony. And I consider harmony to be the relationship between sounds. And so within that are scales and modes, understanding the keys, understanding how chords relate to one another, understanding being able to use your ear, sometimes as well as a lead sheet if you need it, to be able to understand how things connect, voice leading, how a solo connects through chord changes, through rhythm and time, through articulation, using your tone and dynamics, and listening at the same time. It's a very holistic approach, and without listening, you can't work on any other things. So they're really connected. It's like I tell my students, it's almost like if you think about the Hawaiian Islands or the Philippines, right? And you see them, like you almost think that they're floating, but they're not. They're all connected. Like if you took the water away, you would see that those land masses are all connected. And so it's like when we talk about the fundamentals, I think a lot of times students see them as like these separate entities from themselves. But in reality, if you take the water away, they're all connected.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because if you view music in more of a holistic sense, like in an Eastern perspective or an African kind of perspective, then it's easier to see all those things as one different sides of the same thing.
Absolutely.
Whereas in the West, the European sort of approach is to tend to sort of dissect things and to separate them out, which is really good for analysis. It's not without merit, but sometimes the pieces don't get reassembled.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's almost like they get cut and they get moved away. It's like you're having a puzzle that nobody ever puts together. And that's unfortunate sometimes. You speak about Africa, and African music for me was one of the keys in my musical journey. There was a percussionist. So we used to always hear that jazz, the big umbrella of jazz, whatever that may be, that jazz was a combination of African rhythm in European harmony.
Right.
And so my question was always like, okay, well, why are we having to take 4 semesters of European harmony you know, um, like studying the music of Europe, but we're not studying the music of any other continent. You know, like what about Africa? What about South America? What about, Australia, etc. And so there was a percussionist at North Texas named Leanne Harris, and somebody told me one time that she was really into African music, and so I asked her one day if she would burn me her 2 favorite African records onto a cassette tape. And I remember her eyes got really big, and she was like, "Wow, really? You want to hear this stuff?" I was like, "Yes," and I've never heard it before, And I was like in my early 20s. I had never heard any music out of Africa, and she gave me King Sunny Ade, and on the other side was these field recordings from the Congo. And I'm telling you what, man, like I lost my mind to hear what was going on. And the thing that really affected me, because then I started to find other recordings, field recordings, and that kind of thing. And the thing in particular that really turned me around was that this music was connected directly to every part of their life. Birth, death, puberty, wedding, dry season, rainy season, someone leaving the village, someone coming back into the village, harvest, planting season, all these different things. I was like, I said, that's the key. It's like it's all connected. So you can't have a life that is disconnected from your art and be sincere about it.
Yeah. No.
And it really flipped some stuff in me, and it's made such a difference in my life,
Let alone the whole concept of music and dance being the same thing.
God, yes.
That whole thing is like it's just a different way to think about the music. A conversation that I have with my students often is about how rhythm, there's a primacy of rhythm in black music.
Yep.
There's this primacy. And the way that I try to express that is to use the illustration about how in European classical music, harmony is the highest currency, right? Functional harmony. So what I say is, okay, if you can imagine, say, the orchestra is about to play some Brahms, you're playing cello, you're playing the primary cello chair, and you just decide that you're going to play all of the correct rhythms, but any notes that you want to. With everybody else playing. Right? As wrong as that seems, that's how wrong playing African American music, black music, with the wrong feel. The feel is of that magnitude of importance.
Yeah.
The feel.
Yeah.
And that permeates, all of the influence that jazz, I don't really like the term jazz because
I don't either.
Yeah, we're stuck with it, but it's not particularly descriptive because there's so much music that sort of gets poured into a bucket, and for people that don't really know anything about music, certain expressions that get used don't seem to lend any. There's no precision about it. So, like, can you jazz this up for me? I'm not sure exactly what that means. I kind of understand what somebody means when they say that, but I don't know exactly. Or, the fact that a substantial portion of the public thinks that jazz is basically instrumental R&B,
Right.
And so it just makes it really, so anywhere from that to like bebop or like, you know, avant-garde or something. It's like it's just not very precise.
I tend to describe the word jazz as an umbrella that sits over a lot of different kinds of music. Yeah. And when somebody says, "Oh, I like jazz," I say, "Okay, well, you know, what, like Louis Armstrong, Ornette Coleman,
right,
blah 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 blah."
Yeah, right. You haven't really said anything yet.
Oh, okay, right.
Now, right.
Yeah. But no, I agree, man. I do look at it more as kind of a blanket that gets thrown over something, and again, there's been, you know, there's every style of music. I don't even like the idea of genre anymore.
Yeah,
you know, and everything is become so influenced by everything else. A lot because of the internet, of course, you know.
Well, but even when there wasn't, even when it was more segregated, stylistically segregated, genre is not really. See, our music tends to be the same musicians playing all kinds of different things. You know, they're playing. You know, Coltrane is, you know, playing R&B. You know, walking the bar. You know.
Yeah.
You know, so our music tended to be, people are, you know, musicians are just doing what's necessary to make a living playing this music.
Yeah.
And so they find themselves in all kinds of different situations. And it seems to me that genre, although, again, I think there's some usefulness as far as being able to analyze certain properties, certain components, aspects, nuance, history associated with a particular style of music. But as far as the general public goes, it's really a way for the record industry to sort of maximize how they're going to market a certain kind of music.
Yeah, it's a marketing ploy. Absolutely. Yeah.
And
well, you know, you brought up a really interesting point earlier that I don't want to get too far past it before I address it. You were talking about you know, music and dance and the rhythm as being of the highest currency.
Yes.
Which I think is a great way to put it, by the way. And one of the things that I learned when I was with the Flecktones was that everything is dance music. And I didn't realize that before. It didn't occur to me in that sort of epiphanal way. And so, and I remember it was on stage when it happened, and I remember watching the audience, and we were playing some really weird stuff, you know, like all sorts of odd time signatures.
Oh yeah.
And I was watching, like, there were a bunch of hippies that were there, and then we would call them kelpers because the way they would kind of move their hands and all this, right? Kind of this trippy kind of dance. But man, they were grooving, and it was and I realized, well, it's either an up or a down. That's all it is, you know. And when it feels good, like when the groove is really there, people will move. And I've realized also that all the music that I've loved in my life has all had that.
Yeah, you know, it reminds me of so I interviewed Rodney Whitaker and for this series, and one thing that I talk to my students about when I'm talking about feel and having that as a priority and the most important thing about your playing is that even before Rodney was the player that we know he is now, when he was coming up and he was learning, you know, what notes are appropriate to play, you know, on a rhythm changes or on something, he could be playing notes that were not the right notes, but the groove was so heavy that it totally excused any any note that was not there. It just sounded hip because the feel was so killing.
Do you think that comes from like the history of the Black church, also the what word am I looking at? Maybe the tradition or the heritage of the music, where it comes from, how it's been passed along by rote through gospel music. And even when you think about, language that came out of Africa and Brazil, the depth of that language, the relationship of that language to the rhythm of the music, which has always been a fascinating study for me also, the way those things tie in together. I'm just curious if your thought is that has a lot to do with sort of the motion and emotion of the rhythm of that music.
So, Black American music, and therefore and consequently downstream from pop music, swing pop music, jazz, rhythm and blues, everything, all of it came out of the early Black church.
Right.
And so at one point you had these sort of camp meeting revivals, still sort of under slavery, or right after slavery had ended. And in the camp meeting revivals, you started to see more personalized messaging in the lyrics of the songs that were sang. So it wasn't just about sort of this general message, about Jesus and salvation. It was also about sort of specific struggles that people were going through. This was like personalizing, this is my struggle, this is, this kind of thing. And I think it's from those camp meeting revivals that popular music, R&B, rhythm and blues is basically expressing, this is what's wrong with the world, this is what's wrong with me, my wife left me, expressing those really individual things. And I think that sort of more personal sort of message, I think that's really where all of the popular music came from, in jazz and everything else. They came out of that sort of stream. But it's like a cliche, the sort of kind of musicians that are just growing out of Black churches. Musicians that can play all kinds of instruments. They can, they have chops on everything. They can, and it's kind of like, well, such and such is playing drums, so I guess I'm supposed to play bass now.
Yeah.
It's just what's expected.
Yeah.
And one thing about Black church music is that there's a conviction.
Yeah.
Black church drummer is going to play. They're not gonna. There's not going to be. It's not a lot of subtlety. There's a lot of conviction. And it's all about the pocket. It's all about the groove. And yeah, so I think my answer would be yes. I think that's where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, there's an authenticity to it also that like I wasn't really much of a church kid growing up, and I would say that religion didn't really play a big part in my life. But when I've heard certain gospel music, when I've seen video, when I hear Aretha sing, for example, Yolanda Adams, Kirk Franklin. There's a number of people, and I hear them sing. It stirs something in me, and I think that word you use, conviction. I think that's a big part of it. The intention of what's there and the authenticity of it also, is profound. And you know, the idea of goosebumps, and where does that come from within us? Like where in our DNA does that come from? And what gets excited, like literally excited vibrationally, you know, when that's that, like what brings it? Like I remember hearing one of the Tuvan throat singers, the very first time I ever heard Congarol Andar, he started singing and I started weeping. And I was like, what is going on? Like, it wasn't like I was sad. It was, I mean, and I'm talking about it now and I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, right? I mean, it's those moments where you're just like, what is going on here? Yeah. You know? And it's so interesting to me, man. Like, you know, and I didn't grow up, I grew up in Maine, you know? There weren't a lot of black people in Maine. You know, so I wasn't exposed to this music. When I moved, I always tell people one of the greatest things I ever did was move to the South. You know, when I got out of Texas, I moved to Nashville in '91, and in the music of the South, like Alan Lomax recordings, you know, Smithsonian Folkways, et cetera, like all these field recordings, people like Otha Turner, Mississippi fife and drum music. This stuff has changed my life in a very profound and very palpable way. And that I think that had I moved to New York or somewhere else, I wouldn't have been exposed to this music. And one of the things that I miss in a lot of music that I hear is that heritage that's in there, you know? And I, you know, I talk to my students about it all the time also. And you know, trying to get them to understand that this relationship that we have with music, this relationship that we have with sound and with art, and with our emotions, and how we, sort of the process of bringing those forward. How do we do that, you know? And from what I've seen, which is again limited in the black church, that's encouraged, you know? And it seems like music has been a way to get through adversity, overcome certain situations, you know, through song and dance. Like you can cry and you can open up in that way. That's extraordinary, you know?
Yeah, it's you know, music is capable of so much. And all the great music that has been created, I still think it can do a lot more.
I agree.
You know,
absolutely.
I think it can do a lot more. But the, yeah, and I tell people this, you know, I'm stuck with music. I can't imagine doing anything else. There's nothing I can. I mean, I would be miserable, completely miserable without it. And I think I'm totally spoiled with, you know, with the life that I have that's been so focused and centered around this, you know, this thing that we call music that we're barely even scratching the surface of. You know, it's pretty exciting, man.
Yeah, it really is. You know, and you know, I always talk to my students about this also. I say, look, man, like you've got to find creative ways of being creative, and I think that that's one of the things that we're good at. You know, as artists, I think that creativity is something that that we don't struggle with. You know, I mean, we struggle with creativity. You know, trying to get from this point to the next, like trying to sort of unwrap it and open it up. But creativity is something that is an asset to us. That's one of our strengths. And So thinking outside the box is, because I teach at Vanderbilt, which is an expensive school, and these kids are privileged. They come from pretty well-to-do households, the vast majority of them, and academically they're super smart. Like, they're brainiacs, man. Like, these kids are unbelievably off the hook brainiacs, and so getting them to think outside their box is a real challenge sometimes. And I remember Dave Liebman came in a few years ago. I brought him to town to do some things. And when he was talking to the Vanderbilt kids, this was before I was teaching there. And I said, well, how did it go? And he said, they were like deer in the headlights. I was like, yeah. I said, they're kind of like that. And but the idea of exposing them to as much stuff as possible, which is hard in an insulated setting like a university a lot of times, and to get them thinking in a different way. I always tell them, look, I'm going to shake you out of the box. I'm going to dismantle the box. I'm going to recycle the box. So there's no more box for you to be in. So we have to start thinking in more creative terms. And and I think that's one of our jobs, is certainly for me anyway, as an educator, is to encourage that. The word education has a Latin root of educare, which means literally to draw out.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking to students, like, I'm asking them questions all the time. Like, they'll be like, well, what do you think about this? And I'm like, well, what do you think about that? Well, what should I play with this? I don't know. What do you think you should play over that? So rather than me giving them all the answers, I'm like, man, you've got to start thinking creatively. There's 168 hours in a week. So if a student studies with me for an hour, they're on their own for 167 hours. Who's really doing the teaching here?
Right.
It's
interesting, that expression, outside of the box. And we think about things as being related to a box, or this subject matter fits in this box. And then anytime that we discover something that doesn't seem to fit in the box, then the expression is, okay, well, we're outside of the box. And the way I think about the box is that there may be a box, but the box is always bigger than we think it is.
I was just going to say that the box is bigger, right?
Yeah, it's always bigger than we think it is. I mean,
yeah.
And especially for some students who, I think that they struggle with the unknown. Like, I don't know if I want to go outside of that box. That's some strange stuff out there. I don't know how to quantify that. Okay, well, you can hold on to your box then. Hold that box. It's it's just 2 inches bigger than you thought it was.
Yeah.
Or it's 4 inches bigger than you thought it was. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And as we're all sort of expanding our boxes, maybe it's less, I don't know, daunting or scary, or whatever. I mean, if we're honest, all of us have things that we'd rather keep to a smaller sized box.
Sure, of course. Absolutely.
And so trying to relate with that and understand that. And
yeah, I like the idea of having a bigger box, because there is comfort in that box, and the last thing that I think any of us as educators want to do is like have a kid feel like they're being hung out to dry,
right.
And but I tell them, I say, look, like I have all these different sayings in my office that I, put on pieces of paper and tape up, and one is leap and the net will appear. And I tell them, I say, leap with me. I'm not asking you to leap alone.
Right.
Like, I'll go with you, but let's leap together, and you'll find that there is a net. So it's a similar idea, I think. And, they come out of high school, man, and they are wide-eyed and they're independent for the first time in their lives. and they're super excited to be independent, and they have no idea what to do. And so we are kind of that transition, almost like a surrogate parent, a mentor, a big brother, an uncle, a friend, and now for me, like, I'm older than their parents are.
Yeah.
I'm like, how did that happen?
Yeah, and in many cases, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
And it's really a strange thing because, I was always the youngest person.
Yeah.
And then you become the older, the older person in the band, bringing along some younger, and then now I'm old enough to be your parent, or and then of course the next step is going to be you could be a grandkid of mine.
Right.
If we're blessed and fortunate enough, to have that experience. But I wanted to ask you. I've been asking folks about, when they got turned on by music, and maybe talk a little bit about their home life when they were growing up, and maybe some early mentors. You were talking about jumping with the student. Who was jumping with you?
I had a really great director. I started playing in Maine, in a really small town in Maine, in the middle of Maine, little town called Dexter. We're in the 45th parallel, which is halfway between the equator and the North Pole. And little town of about 3,000 people. Our nearest movie theater was 40 miles away. It was remote. We lived on a dirt road on 40 acres of land. We had a farm also. And but I wanted to play drums. Didn't really know much about the saxophone, but I knew I loved music. And I remember back in that time, it was mostly AM radio, and they would play everything. It was across you might hear Fats Domino and then Loretta Lynn right next to each other. Yeah. So there was a lot of variety, and I remember being really enamored and moved by vocalists in particular, and especially soul vocalists. Especially, like, I would hear ballads, and I would be so moved by those, and so when I started playing, the director said, well, because I'm sure my folks were like, yeah, Ixnay on the drums. And so he said, well, what about saxophone? We need some saxophone players. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And so I remember this clear as day, man. I got the instrument home when they finally came in. You ordered them and all that. And it was a Vito alto. It's a new rental, and it had those silver latches on the front, the blue case, like almost like a fake crocodile skin case.
Yeah. And
you open it, and there was that plush, almost like velvet Elvis kind of inside of it.
Yeah.
And so there was the horn, there was the neck stopper, there was the neck, the mouthpiece, the ligature, the cap, the reed, the swab, the lyre. There was so much stuff, and I remember looking at the case and going, wow, that's a lot of stuff. I closed the case. I didn't even take it out the first time. I was so overwhelmed by it, and but I remember being able to pick up melodies early, and my director had a trio that would go out and play on the weekends, and there were two students and him, and so this was through high school that they would do this, and they would usually go on to college, go to Berkeley or whatever. So I think it was 6th grade. Might have been like going into the summer after my 6th grade year that he asked me if I was interested in being in this group. And and I said, sure. I had no idea what he was really talking about, but I was like, okay. And so the summer of my 7th grade year, after my 7th grade year, I started playing with him and doing gigs, and we moved about a year later. So I got about a year taste of that, a little more than that. Bought my first horn I bought with my own money, a King Super 20. And like I had to order it. It took months to get there, and but I remember really loving it and really liking the lifestyle of it. So yeah, Arthur was a real mentor to me. And I stayed in touch with him. He passed a few years ago of ALS, which was a terrible, terrible way to go. And but he and I were very close up to the end, and I was very glad to have him in my life. And when I moved to New Hampshire, we sort of chose the school and the town that we were going to live in based on the music program, because my sister and I were both very involved with music at the time. And University of New Hampshire was there in Durham. So they had a summer youth music school that I went to also, 3 out of my 4 years in high school. Got to know the directors, got to know a bunch of the musicians in the area. There were jam sessions, etc. And so I remember, always wanting to be involved with music from those early times. But when I went to the music camp the first summer, as everybody was leaving at the end, it was a 2-week camp. We all stayed there. We all hung out, had an amazing time. Laughed more than I've ever laughed in my life. Met some incredible friends. That's where I met that guy, John McKenna, I was telling you about. And when everybody was leaving, they were exchanging phone numbers and addresses. People were hugging, people were crying. And like I realized, like, these are my people. This is my tribe. These are the people that I want to spend the rest of my life with. And I remember it very, very clearly. Like it was almost like a lightning bolt. And I was like, wow, this is my group of people. And so even with students now, I'm like, I said, you're part of the tribe. I said, I'm just one of almost an elder now at this point, but we're still in the same tribe, and that's why I always tell students, I said, look, if you want to learn and you don't have the money, I will teach you for free. It has nothing to do with the money part of it. There's an obligation, in my opinion, as an artist, as a musician, to pass this information forward. And to give these young cats as much opportunity as possible, like I was given those opportunities. I met Dave Pietro at the Summer Youth Music School, and a number of my other friends that I'm still very close with to this day. And so these relationships that develop through these mentorships. Have been really huge in my life, and very profound on a lot of levels.
So you went to North Texas. Can you talk a little bit about that? I remember, I think you did a music ed. You were a music ed?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when I went there, one of the reasons I went so far away, is that I decided that I had to figure out if I was going to sink or swim. It was like throwing myself into the deep end of the pool. And again, I come back to John McKenna, who was checking out schools. He was checking out Indiana, North Texas, William Patterson, and Berkeley. So he said, hey, my dad is going to drive me around to these schools. Do you want to go? And I was like, yeah, I do. So we drove to Indiana from Massachusetts from New Hampshire rather. And John and I flew to Texas at the time. So at Indiana, Ralph Bowen was at Indiana.
Yeah.
Then we were like, holy crap, man. Like, this guy is unbelievable, you know? We get to North Texas and Craig Handy is there. And we're like, holy shit, man. Like, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where are these guys coming from?
Mm-hmm.
And so then we drove back from Texas. We drove to New York. It's the first time I'd ever been in New York. We went through Boston. Stan Getz was playing. We got to hear Stan Getz play. And but in North Texas, I felt really comfortable, you know. And I had an aunt that was living there in just right outside of Denton. Dave Pietro had started to go to school there also. And so I felt like, you know, I had two family members there. And I thought, this feels good to me. And I made the decision that I wasn't going to do a performance degree because for me, first off, I knew that I enjoyed teaching. I wasn't going there with thoughts of going into a high school program and teaching music. That wasn't what I wanted to do. But I didn't feel that for me, getting a piece of paper that said I could play my horn really made any difference at all. You know, so I wanted to have something that I felt was something valid to myself.
Right.
And so I felt like a music education degree was that. I had great teachers growing up who I really loved and respected. And I thought, you know, well, I'm going to have to teach. As a musician, I'm going to have to teach. And so I'm happy for that insight that I had early on, because teaching has been a huge part of my career, and I love it more than I could possibly say. And
now, do you feel
I'm very thankful for that.
Now, do you feel like you're teaching? I'm asking you loaded questions. I know what you're going to say.
Load them up.
But right. But do you feel like your teaching informs your playing?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. It's very interesting. I've thought a lot about this. Somebody told me many, many years ago that you teach best what you most need to learn. And my head kind of exploded when they said that. And so it's interesting, man, because, you know, for me, I was never like the most naturally gifted musician. I have worked my tail off, and I continue to do that because I'm terrified of being found out that I have no idea what I'm doing. You know, there's this imposter syndrome that exists, and I still deal with that sometimes. You know, even at this point in my career, and so the things that I've done, like I was just talking to Ryan Mitta, who's the director of the program at Vanderbilt earlier today about this. You know, when I think about where our students are in relationship to where I was at their age, you know, because I remember where I was when I was a freshman in college. I remember where I was when I was 20, when I was 22, whatever. When I got to college, I didn't know that, let's say in the key of G, that the sharp sign has to go where the F sharp is. Like, I didn't know that fundamental knowledge. And I didn't know how to read chord changes. And, you know, all these things that I've had to work so hard at to understand them. It gives me the ability to teach them because I've had to figure it out. I'm writing a book right now that's dealing with beginning improvisation. You know, with voice leading, understanding the skeletal system, the arpeggiation, which I consider to be the skeletal system, understanding music vertically as it's moving along horizontally, you know, and being able to talk to students. Because look, and you know this too, as well as anybody, that the thing that every student will say is a weakness is playing chord changes, you know, and so that was a real weakness for me early on. Like, you know, I would talk to people and say, man, what do you think I should work on? Man, you got to nail the changes, dude. You've got to really be able to nail this stuff down. You've got to understand voice leading. And nobody ever told me what voice leading was. It took me years to figure that out.
It's a very abstract concept, actually.
Right.
It is a byproduct of the movement between changes.
Yes.
Yes. And
but there is a way. Sorry to interrupt, but there is a way to understand. Like, so for example, one of the things, like if I've got a student that's coming and they can play the instrument, they have a basic understanding of a little bit of harmony. They can understand some. So I'll take a blues, and I'll say, I want you to let's see if you can arpeggiate all 12 bars, right?
Right. And
most times they can't. Okay, like if there's a 6th chord, God forbid there's a 6th chord in the 8th bar, they fall all over themselves, and or a 3-6-2-5 at the end if there's a turnaround. They're most of the time they don't have that facility coming in as freshmen. So we talk about that. We simplify it, and then say, okay, let's look at this. Let's just take one note per bar. So let's say that we're in the key of B flat concert. For me, C to F in the first 2 bars, right? So I say, okay, if we start on that C, and we look at, and so we'll write it out vertically, and we'll look at it. I say, you can't use the common tone. So you have one of 2 choices. You can either move up or you can move down.
Right.
Okay. And so we actually draw it out on the board so they start to see the architecture of it, And then I show them through one note per bar using rhythm, you can create a solo using one note per bar, And then we add a second note. How does this lead into that next bar? If you go C to B flat, you have one of 2 choices from that B flat. You either move up to the C or you move down to the A.
Right.
So we slow it down. I start to have them write it out. Like, I don't do it for them. I say, you tell me what you're going to go to next. You write it on the board. I already know how to do this,
Right.
And so giving them that experience. So this is something that I'm working on to codify for young players, like young players, that this becomes part of their vernacular. And, playing in an unfamiliar key, they see an F sharp chord of any type, or a C sharp or an A flat, and they're done, So doing things in 12 keys, doing blues in 12 keys, is an essential part of their development, in my opinion. And then doing tunes in 12 keys. And I always tell them, I say, look, the most important word in your vocabulary with me should be why. Because if you don't understand why we're doing something, you have to ask me.
And also you'll lack the motivation to work it out if you don't understand why.
Yes, absolutely.
It makes it really hard to do something that I don't even know why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
What's the point of this?
Yeah.
When given a choice, you'll choose to do something else.
Yeah. So part of it is stoking their curiosity, trying to inspire them to be curious, and get them asking a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And,
you were talking about the voice leading. So classical theory is very interested in voice leading. It's a real primacy of the way, and it's the reason why you're allowed why certain chords you're not allowed to do, it's, as far as functional harmony. And there's certain things you're not allowed to double and all of that. The problem that I have with that approach is that it is it's very cumbersome. The way that I think it tends to be communicated. And so what a student could actually gain from that, they're so confused by, the sort of clunkiness of the way that it's either taught or the way that it's, worked or whatever, that it's hard for them to absorb that information about voice leading. So things that they actually, if you've taken the first theory class, theoretically you would understand this, but they still don't understand it because it never, it was never in their ear either.
Right.
Right. So yeah, the voice leaning thing is a challenging thing, and if I'm honest, it took me, even when I could play changes, I still wasn't really paying attention.
Right. Me too.
To the voice leading. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating study, and you're asking before, again, if teaching informs your playing, my playing, it does on every level, and talking about listening, I was like, it's not lost on me that I've been teaching listening for the last 20 years. Again, you teach best what you most need to learn. Okay. I get it. And so I think that there's a profundity in education, and I'm as much a student to my students as they are a teacher to me also, and vice versa. And I always tell them, I say, chances are pretty good I'm going to learn more from you than you are from me. And I said, and you're going to learn a lot from me. And but it's a reciprocal thing. It's a reciprocal thing for sure. And there are certain things I know, and there are certain things that I don't know. And I'm very willing to admit that I don't know things. And I think that's that's an important part of education also, is understanding that there are things that we don't know, that we'll never know at all.
So Jeff, one second.
Yep.
Okay, there we go. Unplugged on myself. So you're talking about teaching and implied in a master apprentice teacher student relationship. And you mentioned this before. Okay, you're with the student's going to be with you for 1 hour. Now there's 167 more hours, right? And
right.
So the implication here is that the student is going to be practicing. Okay,
hopefully.
Yeah, right. If you want them to sound any better when they hear you,
right.
When you hear them again, right, the student has to practice. My question is about what you practice. So, I don't practice the same things that I used to practice. There's certain things that I do well, and so I don't spend as much time working on that stuff now.
Of course.
If something is rusty, then I can go back and I can touch it, and then I can move on. What is it that you're into right now? Like, what does a practice routine look like for you? What kinds of things are you working out right now? And does your practice tend to be more project oriented, or does it tend to be, more sort of general musicianship oriented, or is it a combination of the two? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the two.
Yeah.
I'm still doing tunes in 12 keys, trying to really find connection points, like trying to get a fluidity with the horn in a way that really expands how I'm hearing music. I consider practice time to be writing also, to be working on music, which is pretty much my entire day, every day.
Yeah.
So, understanding melody and harmony and rhythm, how they combine, structure and form within a tune, transparency. I did an EP that came out a couple of weeks ago called Songs of Solitude that is 3 tunes, about 25 minutes, primarily, well, it's all soprano, but I did a bunch of woodwind voicings, and I have Victor Krauss on bass. Very simple bass lines, ostinatos, but the soprano melodies are tricky. They're very sort of Eastern in a lot of ways. You know, some are based. One was based on a raga, and but there's an intricacy within them, a complexity within the simplicity. But also thinking about sort of the 3-dimensionality of music. You know, we talk about space all the time, and it's a very difficult concept to, I'm not even going to use the word master because I don't know that anybody has ever mastered it, but understanding the transparency of sound, understanding sort of where, like, you can put a color within the spectrum of a canvas, and if you put it in the right place, it's profound. You know, and so I'm working on that. I'm always working on my time also. Like I feel time in my body, but translating that sometimes is a challenge for me, you know. And so I'm always working on that. I'm always working on trying to really get inside of that. And so I'm thinking about articulation all the time, intonation also, you know, because I play a multitude of instruments. If I'm playing bass flute and then like going to soprano and then piccolo and then baritone or bass clarinet or something, you know, it's just like, oh God, man. You know, some of it is such a challenge to like really get all of this together and making sure that my airstream is correct and all this different stuff, you know. So I'm practicing fundamentals all the time at, you know, at a higher level of practical application, basically.
Yeah.
And I think of it almost like, you know, and you're an athlete, you understand this. It's almost like cross training where you're doing something familiar in an unfamiliar way. And so it's really challenging, you know? And so I think that's a lot of it, you know, trying to find out how instruments relate to one another, how they do or don't work with one another sometimes also. Sort of what I mean, I guess, you know, like I guess I could break it down to trying to understand what music is asking of me. I mean, I guess that all that stuff kind of funnels down into that, because I really feel like music is a service industry, that we're serving the music first and foremost, that then we serve the musicians, then we serve the audience. So I'm at least 4th on that list. So I am trying to say, how can I serve these instruments? You know,
yeah, thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. I think there's like a postmodern, there's a kernel of truth in this, but there's an aspect of it that I think doesn't serve us well, and that is the idea of pleasing yourself first. Of that you know, if you're not happy, then you can't make anybody else happy. You know, right. this kind of, it's really very kind of a self-centered kind of thing.
Yeah, very much so.
Now, in one sense, our perspective, we're not able to see outside of our own perspective. We can learn to try to interpret what's happening outside in a way that's more generous, and that favors those things. But even in that action, we're seeing it through our own eyes. So in one sense, there's something that rings true about that. The idea that if you're not happy with your own playing, if you're not happy with whatever's going on, then how are you going to, so there's an aspect of truth there. However, I think that there's a lot of musicians that they're so involved in pleasing themselves with their music that they so alienate the audience, the other band members, and then they're not even. The tradition doesn't mean anything. Who cares about tradition? It's about what I feel and what it is that I'm trying to do right now, and that's not relevant. That doesn't relate to me. And we have to realize that we're part of this community, this tradition, this fellowship, this we're part of this thing, and you can't you can't sort of disrespect the history, the tradition, what makes this thing what it is, and then also expect to be propelled by it.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, you can't disrespect the tradition, and yet at the same time expect to be propelled by it. That's a great way to put it, man. That's a very clear way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, and folks get upset because people aren't digging them. They're not digging their music. Oh, people, they just don't understand what's happening.
Right.
And you know what? It can take a long time to develop an audience to develop an audience doing the things that you want to do, getting enough people to want to support. It takes a long time to do that. I mean, what it is that we're doing in general, that what we're doing is not top 40.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, I will say this, man, that there are very few Thelonious Monks out there. There are very few Ornette Colemans, very few Charlie Parkers, very few Louis Armstrongs. They are out there. There's no question. And with 7 billion people on the planet, there's far more now than there ever were. Yeah. And I mean, Mozart wasn't an anomaly. There were more of him.
Yeah.
He was just in the right place at the right time, so he got noticed. But there were other people.
Apparently, his sister was more talented than him too. That's what they say.
Interesting.
That's crazy.
But I think my point with that is that even those guys were connecting.
Yeah.
It's like I just think that the intention is so much a part of it, and the intention of the arts has to be to connect on some level. It has to be. There's got to be something. I mean, even there's a lot of artists. You were saying that you're an introvert. There's a lot of artists who are heavily introverted, that they want their artists to speak for them, so they don't want to talk. Which is very valid. It's fine. But it's not a selfish thing. I mean, look, I will say this: as musicians, we are extraordinarily selfish people. To get to a point of expertise, if you will, doing what we do, we have had to be selfish. We have had to put in a tremendous amount of time on our instruments, a tremendous amount, tens of thousands of hours alone.
Oh yeah.
And that's not even talking about just gig time, and the relationships that we've had to develop to surround ourselves with these other masterful people and to be inspired by them. That said, there's also a selflessness to it, because we've given our lives to art, to creativity. So there is a selflessness even within the selfishness, that we've dedicated our lives to something that that I think we both believe, and that many of us believe, has a higher purpose in the world.
Right.
You know, and there's great sacrifice in that. We as musicians have sacrificed a lot, you know, and we continue to sacrifice willingly for this cause.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's a great cause. It's a great cause.
Yeah, sure is. Sure
it's a great
is.
cause.
Yeah.
You know, I said this earlier. I'm stuck with music. It's the only thing that I want to do.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I
Me
ever
too.
wanted to do. You know, it takes a lot. It demands a lot of us, but I can't think of a better way to, or a better tool or instrument to, you know, continually perfect myself until the day
Yeah.
I die.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it teaches us a lot about us as individuals, the relationship that we have with music, with our instruments, really, I think, reflects a lot of where we are. You know, it's funny, like I still find myself getting really frustrated sometimes, you know, and I think part of that has to do with, you know, being in lockdown for 6 weeks now. But because I record myself, you know, and I'm pushing buttons trying to make sure that everything is right and have the music in the right place that I've got to play, and blah 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 blah, and like I'll forget to mute myself, so I'll have a delay going on in my headphones rather than coming out of the monitor, or I'll forget to hit the record button. I'll be like, oh shit, you know.
Yeah. And that was the take. That was the money.
Right, exactly.
That was the
Like,
money.
oh, that was kind of pretty good. I almost said, oh, I wasn't even recording. Oh man,
Yeah.
you know. So, you know, stuff like that, and but it you know, it brings out our relationship, and there's, you know, what greater thing is there to work on, and so it's challenging though sometimes. It's challenging. I'm saying it's the way it's supposed to be.
Man, we could talk, and this it reminds me so much of that conversation we had at Ohio State.
Yeah.
During the camp. We could just keep talking and talking and talking, because it's just very, it's interesting. I find you saying so much of what I would say. I wanted to touch one thing, and then I wanted to give you a chance to give us a final word, and maybe talk about some, if you have a project or something that you're about to release or anything like that. I want you to be able to promote that.
Sure.
And of course, I'm going to put in the description to the video, I'm going to put your website so people can find you easily.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
You were talking about how you grew up in the country on a dirt road.
Mm-hmm.
Guess who else did that?
See, well, there's two of us here. Let me get
This guy. My parents still live in that house. It's still a dirt road.
Wow. Where is that?
It's in Eaton Rapids, Michigan.
Yeah.
The only Eaton Rapids on earth, as it says on the sign when we come in. It's a small town. We lived actually in the township, not in the city limits of Eaton Rapids, and it was sort of equidistant between Lansing and Eaton Rapids city limits. But yeah, so still dirt road. You know, I grew up with horses and four-wheelers and go-karts and all of that outdoors stuff. We had 2 acres, but there was an 80-acre cow pasture behind our house. And when I got old enough, I would, during the summer, I would bale hay to make some extra money.
God, that's like the hardest job in the world.
Oh yeah. If you want to you want to test your grit.
Oh my God.
In true story, my dad struck an arrangement with the the farmer that owned the cow pasture behind us in the cows, he was a dairy farmer, and so we would go over to his house and go into his barn where the milk vat was.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and we had jugs, and we would dip out and just get our own. We'd get our own milk.
Yeah.
And it's a funny thing, because when we switched from that to whole milk, which was 4% in the store, we were like, ugh, whole milk tastes like water.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember getting the milk in the glass jars, from the neighbors,
So, yeah, so I just, when you were talking about that, I almost stopped you and told you right away that was the case. Fine. But I knew I liked you. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about goals for the future, and and I trust, by the way, that your family is doing well.
Yeah,
and everybody's safe.
Okay. Yeah, thankfully. Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of one of the things that I'm super passionate about right now is raising money for local musicians. Okay. I've been very fortunate with the gigs I've had to have consistent work for many years, and one of the things Bela told me very early on, he said, "Man, be smart with your money," and so I have been. I've been smart with my money, and so I feel like being able to help my community is a big part of what's going on in all this. So the ITAstudiostreams.com website has a place where people can donate through PayPal to the ITA Studio Streams, and 100% of that money, I get nothing at all out of this. 100% of that money goes to local musicians, and so that's a big passion for me right now, and I'm pushing that as much as I can. I've been writing a lot. I'm in the middle of 20-something tunes right now, just like singles that I've been sending around to. Like, I've got Vic and George Porter Jr. on a tune for the very first time, and I'm going to try to get Nick Payton on that tune, maybe Branford, and then allow the Ellis Marcellus Center. I've already talked to the director down there to allow them to use it to fundraise. Like, if you donate X amount to the school, like, you get a free download of this tune and this kind of thing, So trying to utilize some of this material in particular ways. I've been sending stuff to Brazil to get guys to record on it. Local musicians also, and I'm making sure that everybody gets paid, Wow. And I've been doing a bunch of free stuff for people also, which I've been totally fine with, and just trying to the things that I've been given to share those things. It's like with my studio, when someone wants to record here, a buddy of mine, it's free, I'll come in, I'll just push. I don't have to play on it. I don't care at all. I'll just, I'm happy to set the mics up and push the buttons and go, that was great, and give them the recordings and whatever, because there's a lot of cats that can't afford to go into a studio, and I can get really great sounds here, and but I've got a couple of duo projects coming up, one with Helen Gillet, one with Derek Brown. And I had an EP come out called Songs of Solitude that I'm really happy with. Came out a couple weeks ago, and I'm trying to release music for other people, trying to get that out there. And in the education thing, I'm doing more teaching online since I'm going to be home for a while.
It seems like on that live stream I heard earlier today, you were playing some music in the background that maybe was some unreleased stuff.
Oh yeah, the Viridian Trio. Yeah. It's I think it's called Oddballs. And
some hip stuff, man.
It was really fun. Yeah. And but it's a lot of times it's just little experiments that end up turning into tunes. A lot of times I'll find what's within reach of me, like even if it's like a glass bottle or a shaker, and I'll start to make music out of that and see where those experiments kind of come to. And there's this one tune that I right now it's just called Bass Clarinet Tune, but it's a tune that's in 13, and I never think about odd meter when I write it. It's not like, oh, I'm going to write a tune in 7. It's like whatever comes out naturally, I'll record it, and then I'll figure out what it is later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why a lot of it has more of a natural feel to it, because it's coming out of a phrase, you know.
Yeah.
And so I had written this thing, and I wanted to get Chester Thompson to play on it. He lives here in town, and I had him playing a couple of I did this Afrobeat thing I started off with a Tony Allen loop, and it broke my heart when he passed last week. And so I said that it's like a 12-minute tune. Chester's son Akil is playing on it. I've got Carlos Malta from Brazil playing fife on the end of it, and this incredible Pandero player who's playing on a couple of different things. Alana Rockland playing bass from Sound Tribe Sector 9. She's unbelievable. Studied with Rodney Whitaker, actually. And you know, so just experimenting with things and you know, just trying stuff and seeing what happens with it. And some of the stuff comes to fruition, and you know, it's really beautiful. But you know, kind of being okay with the process of making music, and that it always takes longer than I want it to take, but I know that that's part of it. And so it's been a lesson in patience for me. And I remember years ago hearing that phrase, patience is a virtue, and I was like, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit, you know. So, you know, music has taught me a lot about patience. And,
yeah. Me too, man. Me too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. But, you know, people can go to my website, jeffcoffin.com, and all the information about all this stuff I'm talking about, all my educational work is on there. Also, the things that I'm into and doing. And I try to, you know, keep my social media current, although I call it anti-social media anymore. And,
yeah.
But, you know, but I like connecting with people. You know, I like putting stuff out there, and you know, whether there's 20 people or 120 people, you know, I'm okay. You know.
Well, Jeff, it's been great talking to you.
You too, man. It's been too long.
Yeah.
And but this was great, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Well, God bless you. God bless your
too,
family, our community, and our world. And pray that we get through this thing as quick as possible.
Yes, sir. For sure. Yeah. Well, lots of love, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Now, you have a good one.
All right. Peace, man.